Sidhartha from Chartis Research, and we're going to today talk a little bit about renewable fuels, models, pricing, challenges, and so on. This is an area that is somewhat less discussed, and the opportunities, challenges, and options are somewhat less well known. For that, I have with me Earl, who has a lot of experience in this area. Earl, if you could briefly introduce yourself.
Yes, thanks, Sid. Earl Burns. I have about 30 years of experience across the barrel, mostly in liquid hydrocarbons and fuels. I've worked at several entities, both regional and international entities, and happy to be here today to discuss this a bit relative to liquid fuels.
Thank you. So with this, I'm going to start off very quickly with what are the challenges do you see in from a pricing perspective and so on, from a policy impact and changing mandates, if you will?
Yes. So, I think that's an area, Sid, that has been a challenge because across the board, you're seeing entities, particularly in Western Europe and the Americas, North America in particular, that are looking to reduce GHG emissions. Renewable fuels are a good way to do this. But part of the problem is that hasn't been great alignment. There's been broad alignment of what needs to be done, but the nature of mandates that come across often are a bit disjointed. That gives opportunities in cases to those that are producers and traders of liquid hydrocarbon renewable fuels, but it also sets up significant challenges. I think a good one to talk about is what happened in Sweden. Sweden last year, mid-year, a right-wing government group presented as part of a platform an idea that the mandate should be cut to reduce the high cost of fuels in Sweden. Sweden is an entity that had GHG reduction targets of 7.8% for gasoline and 30% for diesel in 2023. And they were very, very disciplined about hitting it. Massive demand for renewable liquid fuels in Sweden. The renewable diesel demand in Sweden was about equal to what the renewable diesel demand in California was. That just kind of shows you the nature of how much they really took on these mandates. That mandate I mentioned, 30.5% for diesel. It's dropping for 2024 to 2026. That is to 6%. So you can see really what that does in Sweden. There was an estimation. The Bioenergy Association program director in Sweden, I think in a conversation with a price reporter earlier this year, was talking about the blending of hydrocarbon, of hydrotreated vegetable oil, that is, into diesel, accounted for 24.7% of the total pool in 2022 and 25.7% in the first 9 months of 2023. So that dropping down is very significant, and that causes a sort of discontinuity in the pool. The Swedish demand dropping that much basically creates a bit of a glut elsewhere, and we've seen that kind of happening in Europe and carrying over to the Americas at a time. That makes it hard to price, because when you're looking to price down the curve, it's difficult, right? You've got a prompt cash market that's been very depressed, and which as a buyer, you're obviously going to say, well, this looks to carry on. I'm going to want the lowest price possible. As you're looking to price risk manage it, there's not a lot of liquidity, not a lot of instruments. There are a few in Europe, very few in the Americas that are used relative to the micro market. So it makes it very difficult. And it basically takes you back to a point where you're going to be carrying a pretty significant amount of basis risk no matter what. And you just need to be aware of that. So that Sweden was really the best example relative to policy. There's a bunch of others that if we had more time, I could jump into. But I think that's a good one to kind of start the conversation with.
No, I think that obviously that illustrates the risk of changing mandates. But what about the specifications, the variation in specifications driven by competitors and so on? Does that also create a pricing challenge as well?
Yeah, you can have intermittency in one region created versus oversupply in others. It's a bit of the same dynamic, just caused by a different issue. Like, for example, in Europe, you generally want, relative to your cloud and CFPP, cold flow pour point. That's what CFPP is. Your cloud. It's an indication of it's seen as an indication of quality relative to low temperatures. In Europe, your usage in cold temperatures is much more spread than it is in the Americas. So you create this issue where you have competitors that have geared themselves up, and manufacturers. I don't mean competitors. I mean people. Those that produce liquid hydrocarbon fuels like HVO, renewable diesel. They are producing. And they produce to hit that market. I mentioned Sweden. Sweden generally the kind of what they consider the year-round spec there is roughly a -18 CFPP. Well, there are other areas in the world that aren't quite there yet. So you end up with this imbalance of you have folks producing in the Americas that are looking to hit a spec that is a much higher temperature for cloud or CFPP, and then that you end up with that product really becoming somewhat stranded or having to be used as blend stock. That creates pricing discontinuities, particularly when you're talking about a market that's become somewhat standardized relative to that lower cloud or CFPP point. You can end up with very bifurcated markets, and if a market participant isn't well prepared to be able to hit that relative to specification, you could end up with discontinuities again, particularly if the norm for a region has become a much lower number. So absolutely, create some of the same issues, the same challenges, the same discontinuities relative to pricing and price risk management.
I mean, so we've seen policy impacts, we've seen the impacts of the sort of regional variability, competitive dynamics, etc. But what about logistics? I mean, that clearly throws up a logistical challenge. I mean, you're going to if you have variation, geographical variation, and so on, that clearly throws up a significant logistical challenge of even creating arbitrages, if you will.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, you look at some of the challenges that can very much be created. I mentioned the first two things. You mentioned policy. You mentioned specifications and specification differences. You can also have that logistical issue where you may have, can become exacerbated relative to specifications. You'll have a specification in one area, and then you may, have certain regional rules and regional laws that you have to really stick to. That can really apply to your policy and your specs as well. Keep in mind, but you have rules relative to transportation. That you have to stick to relative to how you get your product from your plant to certain markets. That can create a significant discontinuity if you end up with any sort of congestion relative to that ability. The inability to get to all methods. If a market is a truck market, for example, and you don't have the ability to load out trucks into a market that can get you that best net price for the spec that you make, that can create a significant discontinuity relative to pricing that you work around, but you may have to sell to not a direct customer. But you may have to sell indirectly to what in the US they call distributors or jobbers, who unfortunately will take most of that profit. You keep your product moving, but you have less of a margin that you're able to capture. So a bit of a challenge. There are also, again, other regional rules that relate to things like shipping and rail that can create the same issue.
So now, moving finally to our last but not the least issue of operational issues, plant management, etc. Where do you see them impacting the overall price spectrum, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, and that is one of the things that can really create swings, particularly when you look at the other three factors and you stack those, and then when you have this issue of kind of regionalized specifications, and you have issues of maybe logistical restrictions piled on top of it, and then you talk about the mandate and policy slotted in there. You have plants. A lot of these plants are they operate a bit on the edge. It is a hydro treating process. You are talking about temperatures, pressures that are significant, and you're talking about things like your catalyst, chemicals, et cetera, that are used in these processes become stressed. So when you have the unplanned operational issues, things that you can't get in front of, that can create significant discontinuities. We've seen that happen in the markets, in the traded markets, and we've seen that that's happened globally. We've seen large market participants that ended up being very short in the market towards the end of last year. Global market participants I'm speaking to that now are very, very long, given those other factors stacked on top of those prior operational issues that they're now coming out of. So again, it's one of those things that can affect the nature of trying to understand and assess, your curve and how you're going to look to not only price, but how you're going to look to price risk manage.
No, thank you, Earl. We now bring that to a conclusion. We have seen the impacts of policy, specifications, logistics, and operational issues. And thank you, Earl, for actually shining a little bit of a light on an area we don't often think of in the same sphere as renewables. Renewables liquids are an interesting and dynamic market that I think we've seen some key dynamics and challenges today. Thank
Yep.
you for that.
Yeah. Thank you.